Like Jim said, my name is Micah Hales. I'm the Director of Outreach at Sojourn Community Church here in Beaumont. My wife and I, we moved from Michigan back in June. I'm originally from Iowa. I moved to Michigan to help plant a church in East Lansing, and my wife and I felt the Lord calling us here to the Golden Triangle, to Southeast Texas, and so yeah, we've been here since June. We have a beautiful baby boy named Beau. That is an ode to Beaumont, partially, so it's the first part of Beaumont. If you're wondering about the spelling, we didn't name him B.O. And yeah, we're really excited to be here in the Golden Triangle, and I'm grateful to be up here to talk with you today. I've by far and away the least experienced vocational church staff here, and so I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak with you all about something that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is neighboring, like Jim mentioned. So I want to start with a question. How would you define a neighbor? The definition that I'm going to be sharing with you today, that I think kind of encapsulates a lot of what we've just said so far, is the definition of a neighbor we're defining as someone you live next to, sit next to, or daily cross paths with. So all of those things are what we've talked about, right? We have the classic kind of definition of right, your neighbor, your physical neighbor, the guy you share a fence with, right, or the lady down the street, or whatever that is for you. And you have the people you sit next to, the people that you work with, or the people that you take classes with. There's a wide encompassing range with this sit next to piece of that as well. And then the daily cross paths with is anything else that you're seeing people consistently, whether that's like the gym, the grocery store, gun range, whatever. Like there's tons of different ways that can be applied, and it really kind of encompasses anybody that you are consistently coming into contact with, right? So the definition of neighbor, someone you sit next to, live next to, or daily cross paths with. And so at Sojourn, this is our primary way that we reach new people, to bring new people into our church, right? Back in August, we started something with our church called the Neighboring Challenge. This is something that I brought with me from my previous church in Michigan that we used as we were planting there, and just saw incredible things happen with that. And so as soon as I moved here, I was like, Josh, we need to do this. I was like, I know that I'm like the greenhorn here, but like this is something we need to do, and probably do consistently. And it was 4 weeks of challenges that were designed to help our people reach those around them more effectively, okay, and give them concrete, attainable goals to get there. A lot of people like that structure somewhat, or a challenge. And so the Neighboring Challenge, there were 4 weeks. The first week was to get to know your 4 closest neighbors. Now, some of you may know your neighbors. Some of your people may have lived on the same block for 30 years, right? And you may know quite a bit about your neighbors. But the challenge was to get to know your 4 closest neighbors better, or get to know them and introduce them yourself first. So that was the first thing, and kind of with that was the challenge was to bring a treat, or like a note, or maybe some barbecue, something over to them, and introduce yourself. The second week was invite one or more of your neighbors over for a dinner or a grill out, or just spending time together. So this is inviting people into your home, not just going to where they're at, but also inviting them in to see your life, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And the third week was invite one or more of your neighbors to community group, your small group, or your church. Okay, so that was week 3. And I'm going to come back to these two if any of you care to write them down or not. So week 4 was share the gospel with a neighbor. So obviously, like, the ultimate goal of neighboring with people is to bring them into God's kingdom, right? And to share the gospel with them, and to bring them in to know God. And so week 4 was share the gospel with a neighbor. And so this challenge was designed to get people excited about neighboring, the Great Commission, growing the church, and having gospel conversations. So like I said, we define neighbor as someone you live next to, sit next to, or daily cross paths with. So another question for you all. When you hear about the strategy of reaching people proximate to you, right, the strategy of neighboring, do you feel like it meshes well with your current outreach strategy, or does it challenge it? So as you all know, I mean, doing ministry some of you longer than I've been alive, and that's great. I love learning from you guys in every way possible. No, mature. You're mature. But you all know the church itself is changing every year. Like Jim was just talking about, the landscape of churches is different. The strategies that we use to reach people the past 50 years, right? They might not work like they did previously. Okay, Sunday school, inviting people to church potlucks, having outreach events, and all of those things are effective and have their merit, but they might not be the most effective ways of reaching those new people and bringing them into your church family today in this kind of shifting landscape. And how do we know this, right? So everybody in this room, you're a human being, right? And everyone in this room kind of probably is realizing that our face-to-face interactions with each other are lessening by the minute. Right, technology and advances in things like phones and streaming services and gaming and others are putting a huge damper on our ability to reach others via events because, frankly, we're not going to out-entertain the entertainment industry as the church. That's not our call, and we're not going to be able to accomplish it. And so the standard invite to church, Awana, and youth group is significantly more difficult to usher in than it was even a decade ago. People who proclaim to be Christians are still going to be more hesitant than the past 10, 20 years or so to accept an invite like that because, well, they're content with their virtual church and their other entertainment sources. Okay, so if we have that approach of we're gonna bring people in via entertainment, we're setting ourselves up for failure. So what's the solution? Right? How do we effectively reach other people when our strategy that we have invested so heavily into for so many years isn't maybe working as well as it used to? Right? You ready for the answer? Go. You all know the verse. You all know the command, Matthew 28:19. Go, therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. So what does Jesus say right off the bat here to these guys that he selected from careers in fishing and tent making and all of these average careers? What does he say to them? He says, go. So many times we think about this command in a limited way, right? Maybe not some of us as pastors and church staff, but people think, yes, Jesus, I'll go overseas. Or yes, Jesus, I'll go where there aren't any churches already. Or yes, Jesus, I'll go where there isn't a majority Christian around me. Okay? That's the first thing that a lot of people think. But what about the people around us? Right? We're all on staff at a local church, right? You're invested in your communities. Does this command of all nations include the one that we're already in? Yes. Okay. Did the disciples just ignore the people they lived next to? No. They went to them first. Okay. So we're in the Bible Belt, and there's this stigma that, everyone around me is a believer already, right? There's that, even if you're not thinking it consciously, you're thinking it subconsciously. Or most people know Jesus, or there are enough churches, I don't need to be the one to reach them, others will take care of it. All right, there's that mindset here and around us, and it's something that I've obviously noticed coming from a more secular context in Michigan, where there's not really churches, right? People don't really talk about Jesus a lot or church in their day-to-day lives. And this mindset is killing the growth of the church because we're assuming that people they're good, they're taken care of, and those around me, you know what, like. Maybe they don't need me to neighbor them. I think that they're okay. They say that they go to, First Orange. They're fine. They're hearing the gospel. So I work with college students as one aspect of my job. And one thing I tell students about this is if you're going to assume one way or another, assume that they aren't saved. The worst thing that can happen is that you make sure. Because if you assume that they are, you never know what is going to happen. Last November, my wife and I, we had issues with our shower hot water handle, right? And I don't consider myself a super handy person, so I called a handyman service. And the first person came out, and I'm going to be honest with you, they wrecked our shower. I mean, they just destroyed it. To the point where, the person had left, and then we had to shut the water main off because we couldn't stop the hot water from gushing out because, the handle came off. It was one of those, the house is falling apart kind of situations. And I was dripping sweat, and I was like, whatever, I'm just going to go to bed. I used some of my son's baby wipes and just, laid down. I'm done with it. So we had to rig up a little temporary fix with a little hose spigot on the shower head. It looked pretty hilarious. I've got a picture of it on my phone. We don't have a screen to show, but anyways, so I waited till the second guy came the next morning. Second guy and I are having a conversation about what went wrong, what we needed, the equipment for the job, explaining why my my shower had a hose spigot on it, all of those things, the standard stuff when you bring some in. And one thing led to another in conversation, and ultimately, I told him that I work at Sojourn. And after telling him that, he just said, to me, immediately after I said it, he said, I've had a complicated relationship with God. All right. He didn't say like, I don't know about that. Like he said, I've had a complicated relationship with God. So here's this like perfect opportunity in front of me right after I've been incredibly frustrated for about 24 hours with my plumbing situation. And God just dumps this guy right into my house. Okay. He is born and raised in the Golden Triangle, right? Had grown up in church most of his life. He says, I have a complicated relationship with God. So this is a perfect opportunity. It's in my home. Right? He's a neighbor by our definition, right? I'm crossing paths with him, okay? And I asked him the Kennedy questions, okay? Like I always do with most people. His initial answer was 1 out of 10, right? Not going to get in. He's not getting in. It doesn't matter in any way. And by the end of our conversation, after I had shared the gospel with him, I had explained who God is and why God came to save us and what he must do and to obey and to love the Lord. And by the end of our conversation, he made a decision to follow Jesus. Okay, it was right there in that moment. I'm not super old, so I can count on one hand the amount of times that I've been able to actually walk through an entire decision with someone in one moment, and this was one of them. And at the end of the conversation, I asked him the Kennedy questions again, 10 out of 10. Jesus is Lord, and I believe in my heart that God raised him from the dead. Boom, right? That happened in my house with a neighbor. This man who'd lived here his entire life, he had went to church growing up and into adulthood. He lived around other Christians, other pastors even, right? He had no understanding of what the real gospel was prior to the conversation that I had with him. 40-some-year-old guy. If we assume everyone already believes, if we assume everyone already knows and understands the gospel, or they've heard the gospel before, they've made that decision, there will be countless people around us that will, one, not experience the joy that following Jesus and loving him brings, but they'll stand condemned before God. If we carry this assumption that the people around us already know, they already believe, there's plenty of churches out there, there will be people that will be separated from God forever. Neighboring well allows us to make sure that those people proximate to each one of us don't slip through the cracks. Neighboring allows us as church staff, elders, pastors to not have all the pressure or the blame or the entire evangelism strategy be on us on Sundays. It allows us to spread out our efforts wherever our congregation lives, sits, and crosses paths all over the Golden Triangle. For us at Sojourn, we have people all over the area, right? We have people in Orange, Port Neches, Lumberton, Beaumont, and when each reach the people in their neighborhoods, right? It might take some prodding to get started, okay? But when each of them reach the people in their own neighborhoods, think of how much more ground we can cover than just the area around our buildings. So how does this come about practically? Well, I think there's many ways that neighboring can kind of come about, and there are many strategies that work in some areas that don't work in others. Some communities are different, even here within the Golden Triangle. I mean, you drive from town to town, and things are different. There's different aspects, there's different cultures, even within our cities around us. However, we all do live in Southeast Texas, right? And we all know very well the culture and the spiritual climate, and we know what it's like here. So there are some things that I believe will apply to all areas for all churches. Now, if one of these doesn't work out, you can, let me know. But I think it's like Jim had mentioned, it's a long game and it's a build towards actually bringing people into solid foundations in relationships with the Lord. So, practical application number 1, your people need to identify their neighbors. Okay, this might sound like a very obvious, silly one. Okay, you might think, they know who lives next to them, right? But don't assume that they know maybe more than a name or some characteristics. Okay, remember our definition of a neighbor: someone you live next to, sit next to, or daily cross paths with. Okay, this can mean anyone in their neighborhood, anyone they work with or they sit next to in class, anyone they meet in the park for play dates, anyone they see in the grocery store, the gym, the mall, wherever. Okay, you have to identify your neighbors first. One helpful tool that we used previously with this challenge was to physically map out our closest 4 neighbors that we actually physically live by, right? The actual people that you do live by, unless I don't know, some of you might be way out in the country, or your people might be way out in the country, and they're like, my neighbor's 6 miles this way. That's possible. You can still drive there and go talk to them, okay? So you're not exempt from this. But we've seen this. We've seen people do this all the way up to like their 9 closest neighbors if they live in an apartment building. There's lots of different things that you can do with this, and I think you had mentioned that you read down the 5 closest people that you're proximate to. And so, and the same goes for coworkers and classmates and things like that. Write their names, their characteristics, things that you remember, and study it. Tell your people to do this. Encourage them to do this. Because if we're not actively giving effort into getting to know these people, you won't get to know them. You won't. You'll come home at the end of the day from work. I mean, even coming home from the church, like, all right, I got, kids are bugging me to do this. My wife wants me to do this. Like, I no mood to neighbor, right? So if you don't make a conscious effort to meet these people and to get to know them, you won't. And that's just that. The second thing, practical application. Encourage your people to start a conversation. Okay. Some of your people may have already gotten past the point of introductions with their neighbors, okay? And we're talking about people you work next to, live next to, and daily cross paths with. Maybe they've even talked regularly with their neighbors, but the conversation hasn't gotten that deep, okay? Maybe it's about, my weed whacker broke down last week, Tom. I don't know what to do about it, Listen, I've had a lot of conversations with my neighbors since I moved here, and most of them are like that, okay? So maybe the conversation hasn't gotten deeper over the course of 30 years of living there. Okay? Regardless of where the situation is, encourage them to have a conversation where they ask questions. If you're not asking the other person questions, you're not getting to know them better. Okay? The third practical application, encourage your people to bring their neighbors a treat or food over. Okay? We all love food, right? We just had some Jason's Deli, all right? Like, we love food. Even more so, who doesn't love surprise food, right? That's my favorite kind of food, unexpected food, right? One thing that we can do that goes a long way is bringing a treat of some sort over to our neighbors. My wife and I did this with baked treats. I had nothing to do with the creation of these treats other than moral support. My wife made them at home, right? My wife doesn't claim to be an amazing baker, but she does a really great job at it. And so when I tell you that my neighbors cannot stop talking to us about the plate of treats we brought over, I mean it, okay? So this was probably 2 weeks ago, roughly. One of our neighbors knocked on our door at about 10:30 p.m., okay, which is weird in and of itself because it's dark by that time. You guys know this gets dark early now. And he brought over a pecan pie, and he said, listen, I need more Oreo cake balls. So this is a thank you for the cake balls. And, you need to just, I'll pay you for them. He said, how much you want? How much you want for them? And my wife is sitting there like, we're not going to charge you for the cake balls, man. I'll just make more cake balls, or I'll give your wife the recipe. He's like, nobody makes them like you make them. I just, he was crazy about these Oreo balls. I mean, it was unbelievable. And okay, that is hilarious that he came over and did that, and I was very confused in the moment who was knocking on our door at 10:30. But the baking itself isn't what spurred our conversation with our neighbors, okay? It was the act of kindness in delivering them. I know some of y'all probably aren't excellent at cooking or baking. All right, some of your people might not be either. All right, but this is one simple act that can bridge the gap between surface level neighbor and deep connection neighbor. Fourth practical application: encourage your people to invite people into their homes. Listen, I know down here in Texas, and especially Beaumont, we love our privacy fences. Am I right? I got a 6-footer out back. It's great, right? I can nobody's looking in. My dog can run around freely. It's great. But when we look at these examples of neighboring, it's easy to hide behind your fence and leave the neighboring at the front door. It's easy to deliver something and walk away, but what really takes vulnerability is letting people into your home. I don't know about y'all, but my wife despises a dirty house. I mean, she is a clean nut. It's insane. We have 30 different cleaners under the sink right now at this given time. All right? She loves to clean. and hates when it's dirty. So when we first did this and invited people over, let's just say it was not a stress-free situation, okay? She was getting down and scrubbing the countertops, like things that I'm pretty sure they were there when we bought the house, but that's fine, like cleaning stuff obsessively until the minute our neighbors walked in the door. But after thinking and praying about it, we began to realize that it wasn't how our house normally was. And that wasn't how we normally are. We realized that actually the most open and vulnerable thing to do would be to show people our mess, not to hide it away. To show people how our life usually is and not act like everything is all put together, right? When you invite someone in, mess and all, you invite them into your life just to see how normal, how broken, how dirty, and in need of a Savior you actually are. Now, I'm not advocating for never cleaning, so please don't write that down as a note for, your spouses when you get home. Just don't do that. Don't put that evil on me, okay? Clean your house. Fifth application. Tell your people about their duty to share the gospel and live it out. Folks, we talk about this all the time at church, right? All the time on Sundays. We all need the gospel. We talk about what Jesus did for us. We praise Him on Sundays when we gather together. But what does the rest of our week look like? Are you talking about Him on a Tuesday afternoon at H-E-B, picking up your groceries? Are you praising Him on Thursday mornings at the gym? Right? What about Saturday morning when your kid wakes you up 3 hours before you planned and you wanted to sleep in? Or when your coworker's annoying you to death about a project you're working on? We love to talk about and praise Jesus on Sundays, but God doesn't want just 2 hours of your week. He wants the whole thing. I grew up believing genuinely for the first several years that I can remember as a believer, thinking that it was my pastor's job to be the one to save my friends who weren't Christian. Solely his job. I grew up thinking about the burden of the gospel advancing was on my pastor's shoulders. Solely. Friends, we can't let that be our people's mindset. We can't let our people avoid their duty and their purpose in sharing the gospel and advancing the kingdom of God. They must embrace it and understand it is all of our responsibility to do so, not just our church staff and our pastors. If it's all on them, it will fail. So, some specific challenges that we use. I'm going to read these again if anyone wants a refresher or whatever. Maybe you're writing them down, maybe not. Week 1 was get to know your 4 closest neighbors, bring them a treat or food. Week 2 was invite 1 or more of your neighbors over for a dinner, grill out, or hang. Week 3 was inviting 1 or more of your neighbors to community group or church. And week 4 was share the gospel with a neighbor. So I have 2 challenges for everyone here today. Not your people. This is for everyone here. Okay. Number 1, neighbor those around you, church staffer. Okay. This isn't a do what I say, not what I do situation, or a hey, you guys should do this. Like I'm just going to hang back because like no one's going to talk to me because I'm a pastor. It's the first thing that they're going to know, and they won't respect me, right? But do what Jesus calls you to do. Right? That means pushing out of your own comfort zone or like getting over the fact that, hey, maybe they know you're a pastor and they don't like it, okay? But that doesn't mean that that person needs the gospel any less than the other person that you spoke with earlier that did appreciate that you were a pastor. And you may be thinking, I already shared the gospel, brother. I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm doing it, right? But are you inviting them into your home? Are they seeing your family, your home, and your mess at its worst? Okay, I'm not talking about a once a year or once a season event where you guys clean the house up, right? And you have a great food spread out for everybody and everything's all nice and pretty, right? I'm talking about everyday life in your home. Just because your vocation is ministry does not mean that you're exempt from these challenges and these practices. In fact, we should be steering the ship with these challenges, setting the standard for our people. Otherwise, how can they follow wholeheartedly if we aren't ourselves? Challenge number 2. This is the last one. Challenge your people to take ownership of the mission. Okay? Giving your people concrete, accomplishable goals will go a long way into getting them into a rhythm of neighboring well. Right? People need a road to run on. Right? If you just tell them, hey, go reach your neighbors, just blanket statement. they're not going to do it. Maybe a few really ambitious like teachers or something in your congregation. I don't know. Maybe they have a lesson plan all ready to go. But most people will not. You know your people better than I do, right? So give them challenges and goals that push their comfort level for the sake of the gospel, because that's what matters. I gave some examples at the beginning of what we gave our people, right? And I'm more than willing to share some other ideas that I've also used in the past in our previous church context prior to coming here. And some of you, your people haven't invited someone into their home in 30 years. Okay, so maybe just like start with a conversation first, right, with your neighbor. Like maybe don't jump right to inviting them into your home. Some of you, your people are already having conversations with people, but they haven't taken the next steps of inviting them into their lives. Right? It's been that surface level lawnmower conversation, okay? Whatever your situation is with your congregation, give them an actual challenge, right? You don't have to call it neighboring challenge. I don't even care if you call it any of what I have used so far. As long as you challenge your people to get out there and do their job, then I'm good with it, okay? People love an opportunity to step up to the challenge. The call of the Great Commission isn't for a select few, but it is for all. That's all I got.
I have 2 questions.
Okay, yeah.
First of all, what are some of the challenges that you see with our people?
Uh-huh.
And we talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you should share just some of the issues we face as we try to do this. And then second of all, what do you say to encourage introverts?
Yeah. Good questions. So yeah, we have our fair share of issues with getting people off the ground with the neighboring challenge. Like I said, all the reasons that I mentioned, the culture, the just kind of like, hey, when we get home, we're hanging out. We face a lot of challenge with people. Specifically with our congregation, we have a lot of people that work for the same company and like literally work with each other. And so like they always kind of go, well, everybody I work with is a Christian, like what am I going to do about that? Like how am I going to share the gospel with like Joey goes to our church? I'm not going to share the gospel with him. He already knows it. He's a believer. He's our church member, And like that, we literally, every time I talk to people about this, they're like, people that work there, they're like, man, I don't know if any of them will ever see this, but, it's not an excuse. There's other avenues of being a neighbor, like we talked about, that anyone has. I mean, they all live next to people. And that's the one where they're always like, well, my apartment building's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of sketchy. I don't know if I want to go door to door and like talk to people about it. Like there's, listen, people will come up with any excuse to not do this. But I think one thing that kind of helps in some of those objections and some of those pushbacks that we get from people, not genuine pushbacks, but just kind of more like preferential, like I don't want to do it, is sharing successful neighboring stories to show people, hey, by the way, this road that we're trying to get you to go down, like it's not scary. Like yeah, you might face some roadblocks, but like this is where the road gets to. Like we've had people come to faith through this, come to join our church, like body through this. Like there's success in that, and I think showing people that is hugely helpful, because then those introverts that are kind of like, I don't really know if I'll ever meet anybody, and like what if I say the wrong thing, and like those are all valid thoughts, and we all have those thoughts. I have those thoughts all the time. Every time I speak, this little voice in the back of my head's like, well, what if you say something heretical, like you're gonna get fired, like not that I'm intentionally trying to do that, but like you want to say the right things, and everybody has that in their head, and everybody doesn't want to screw it up, like they don't want to like ruin a friendship because of this, but encouraging your people with success stories and showing them these practical tools. Again, a lot of times with people that are more introverted, they're like, well, I don't really do those types of things. Okay, well, like the disciples didn't really do those types of things either until Jesus came along, right? Peter was a coward before Jesus was resurrected. I mean, like all of these things happened with people prior to them, and I think getting them to understand that and know that there's been introverts since the beginning of time, okay? And other people that have been introverted have brought others to Christ and have reached others that are proximate to them before you. You are not the first. I think when people know that they're not the trailblazer, right, it helps them to think about, what, like, hey, this guy did it, like I can do it, and just continuously encouraging people in that, I think helps a lot.